Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to offer Dr. Moore as an expert in the field of orthopedic surgery, and specifically hand surgery and injuries to the hand.
All right, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
So moved. Yes, sir.
Dr. Moore, now we get to talk about this case. At our request, what have you reviewed, just general categories of information have you reviewed at our request in this case?
So a tremendous amount of material. I reviewed the video deposition and trial testimony of Mr. Depp regarding the injury, the medical records from Australia, the photographs of the injury from Australia and Los Angeles, texts and emails, the deposition of Dr. Kipper, and I'm sure there's more.
And when you reviewed the deposition of Mr. Depp, was that just in paper form?
It was a video deposition.
And so what did you review of that deposition?
The section where he describes the injury.
And did you see a video of him describing it?
I did.
And you watched the testimony from this trial of him describing it?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you reviewed some texts as well. What are those?
There were communications amongst Mr. Depp and his physician and others.
And what did you specifically review in those texts relating to the finger injury?
Well, with relation to the finger, there was a text where he had stated he cut his finger off.
Now, Dr. Moore, I'm going to ask you some questions about this case regarding the opinions that you formed relating to Mr. Depp's finger injury. When I ask you those questions, do you agree to answer my questions to a reasonable degree of medical probability?
Yes.
And do you agree to advise the jury and the court if you are not answering any of them to a reasonable degree of medical probability?
Yes.
Dr. Moore, based on your analysis, did Mr. Depp's finger injury happen as a result of a vodka bottle being thrown at him?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
I'm sorry.
No.
And what is the basis for that opinion?
Well, the medical data is inconclusive. It's not consistent with what we see in the described injury pattern or in the clinical photographs. And there are several elements. There's the description was of the hand being flat on a bar and the bottle crushing the finger from the top. But looking at the images, there's really no significant injury to the dorsum of the finger, and to create the type of injury with that type of a crush injury, we would anticipate both injury to the fingernail and other parts of the finger.
Can I stop you there and just,
Sure.
just break down a few things? You said the hand resting flat on the bar. Can you show the jury what direction the hand was resting based on the documents you've reviewed?
I think that the demonstration was with the hand flat, like this, across and maybe even curled over the edge of the bar like this.
Which side was facing upward? Which side of the hand?
The back of the hand, or we call it the dorsal surface of the hand, was up.
Doctor, if you could get closer to the microphone, I would just appreciate
sorry.
it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. So you referred to the back of the hand as the dorsal side of the hand, is that
That's
right?
correct.
Sort of like the dorsal fin on a shark?
Correct.
Fair. And what is the other side of the hand called?
The palmar surface.
Palmar? Okay. So what direction was Mr. Depp's hand resting on the bar?
So the dorsal side was up, which with the descripted mechanism of injury or the injury, the bottle would have struck the top of the finger at the fingernail.
And you also mentioned a term that I'd like you to explain to the jury, crush injury, please.
So with review of the images and the x-rays, I mean, this was a crush injury. That would generate the findings clinically on x-ray that we saw. The fracture is a we call it comminuted, and the tip of the finger is in multiple splinters, so there are multiple fragments, and typically you see that with a crush type injury.
So a comminuted fracture is one where there's multiple fragments of bone?
That's correct.
And what was the basis, other than what you've read and heard, but from the pictures, what was the basis of your opinion that the hand was resting palmar side down?
Well, that was the way the injury was described and demonstrated in the videos. And so in that position where the bottle to strike the finger the way it was described, it would have struck on the nail. And the nail was really not injured. And so that's not consistent with that pattern of injury.
Michelle, could I get you to pull up Exhibit DX 369, page 26? Your Honor, this is admitted. Ask for permission to publish.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Moore, is this one of the images that you reviewed?
Yes.
Tell us, in relation to your expert opinion on the cause of Mr. Depp's injury, tell us what you see in this picture, please.
So this is it looks like an avulsion type injury where tissue's actually pulled or pinched away. I think what's important in this picture is that the tissue loss is on the palmar aspect from underneath the finger rather than all transversely in the finger, which you would anticipate if the bottle struck the finger. You would expect more of this level of injury rather than isolated to the palmar aspect.
And what do you notice about the condition of the fingernail in this picture?
So from this image, the fingernail appears to be intact. You can't necessarily see the entire nail, but there are other images that have a better profile of that. And the nail's not elevated. There's no subungual hematoma beneath it, or there's no bruise underneath it. Anyone that's ever stuck their finger in a drawer or caught it in a car door or hit it with a hammer knows that almost immediately there's typically bleeding underneath the nail, which creates this hematoma.
So, not being a doctor, I'm going to try to summarize what you just said. Are you saying that in an injury like this, if something had come from the top, that there would be an immediate impact to the fingernail bed?
That's correct.
Michelle, could you please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 144? Your Honor, this has been admitted as well.
All right. Thank you.
Dr. Moore, I believe you mentioned just a few minutes ago that there were other pictures that showed more of the nail. Is this one of those pictures?
Yes.
And explain to the jury, again, and I'm sorry for the graphic nature of this photo, but it's important that the jury understands the basis for your opinion that a bottle couldn't have caused this coming in from above.
Yeah, so again, the mechanism described would have almost certainly led to severe nail injury. I see no subungual hematoma. Again, it's a palmar tissue loss, and the loss is from distal to proximal, which is from the tip back far below the nail. And so for it to create that tissue loss down there would almost certainly have to be injury dorsally with that described mechanism.
So what you're saying is that something coming from the top could not have left the nail intact and yet caused injury from the tip of the finger underneath the nail.
Objection leading.
Overruled.
You can answer.
So I believe that with the mechanism described, that if the bottle struck the nail, there would have certainly been an injury to the nail bed, and in order for the soft tissue injury to be created by that mechanism, there would have almost certainly been tissue loss on the top of the finger as well.
Does Mr. Depp's description of what happened line up with the undisputed photographic evidence that you've reviewed?
No.
Now, we mentioned the term crush injury a few minutes ago. I'd like to show you DX 360, please. And, Your Honor, this is, we won't publish this at this time. Is this a document that you reviewed in connection with your expert opinion in this case?
Yes.
And, Michelle, if you can please go to pages I believe they're 5 and 6. Your Honor, I'd ask for permission to publish these as a demonstrative to the jury.
Just page 5 and 6.
Sorry, 09 and 10.
Page
2
09
pages.
and 10. Could you go to 10 also, so plaintiff can see it? Okay, any objection to 09?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, 09, 010 can be published.
Dr. Moore, what are these pictures of?
So these are x-rays of the injured digit.
And what do you observe in these x-rays? Explain to the jury what you see.
So these are two views. So one in the plane looking through the finger in this direction, and one in the plane looking through the finger sideways. And you can see that the tuft or the tip of the finger, the last bone in the finger called the distal phalanx, is shattered. You can see there's multiple little spicules of bone, and there's also a transverse fracture at that level, which runs through the bone. So this is what we would describe as a comminuted fracture, and it's commonly associated with crush injury.
In your decades of practice, Dr. Moore, have you ever seen a comminuted fracture like this result from an object thrown in the way that Mr. Depp described?
Well, not with the constellation of findings shown on the x-rays. I mean, I think that could create a fracture, but in this setting, it wouldn't create a fracture without the associated other injuries that we would anticipate.
And in your decades of practice, when you see a comminuted fracture like this, what are some things that have typically caused it?
So crush mechanisms could be slammed in a drawer, caught between two logs in the fireplace, car door, sliding glass door. Those are all any mechanism that squeezes the finger between two hard opposing surfaces could create this type of injury.
In the statements of Mr. Depp that you reviewed, how did he describe what happened to the alleged bottle when it hit the bar?
I believe he said it exploded, shattered.
If a bottle had exploded near his finger in the way that he alleges, what would you expect to see in the documents that you have reviewed?
Well, I think that the physicians did a good job of documenting the presentation, the appearance of the wound. They did not document the presence of any glass shards, and there were no other associated injuries elsewhere on the hand.
And I just want to step back for 1 minute. Michelle, can you pull up the next page of the x-ray here? Thank you. And Dr. Moore, just before we move on from x-rays, I know that this, when it's blown up like this, it's a little bit blurry, but can you point out or describe to the jury where the multiple bone fragments are in the finger?
So they're in the very tip. If you see the joint, and then there's what we call the transverse fracture, which is across the middle of the bone in the same plane as the joint, and then the multiple fragments are in the tuft. With a Xerox copy, the quality is not as detailed as a true x-ray.
You can take that down, please, Michelle. Thank you. So back to the glass. In the records that you reviewed, Dr. Moore, did you see any adjacent injuries? In other words, injuries to any other part of Mr. Depp's hand other than the tip of his middle finger?
No.
And is that observation consistent with the explosion of glass type phenomenon that Mr. Depp alleges?
Well, I think in the setting of a glass explosion like that, where there's multiple fragments and the tip of the finger's cut off, you would anticipate that there would be other lacerations.
Did you review the documentation in the medical records from the hospital in Australia?
Yes.
Did any of those providers report retrieving glass from the wound?
No.
What about any glass near the site of the injury?
No.
What about any glass in other parts of the hand?
No.
What about any glass in any of the other fingers?
No.
Is there any reference at all, Dr. Moore, that you've seen to any glass in the records that you've reviewed?
No.
And Dr. Moore, in your decades of practice, have you ever seen an injury associated with a glass explosion that was focused on the end of a single finger in the way Mr. Depp describes?
Well, not consistent with the clinical images and the findings in this case, no.
Have you ever seen an injury associated with an alleged glass explosion where no other glass was found on any part of the patient's body or clothing or anything?
No.
And because there's been talk of a glass explosion, Dr. Moore, there's seems to have been a suggestion that somehow glass may have sliced off the end of Mr. Depp's finger. Is that what's going on here?
No, this wound doesn't really appear to be a sharp glass laceration.
You referred earlier to an avulsion, which is a term I had never heard before. Your opinion in this case. Explain to the jury what that is, please.
So often with crush injuries and we'll see tissue loss that we call an avulsion, or where the tissue's actually pinched or pulled away rather than sliced or cut. And it's not uncommon with crush injuries to see that.
In your decades of practice, Dr. Moore, have you ever seen an avulsion injury with a partial amputation that results from an object thrown from the top of the finger in the way that Mr. Depp describes?
No. Again, I think that the description differs from the clinical appearance on the images.
Michelle, can you please pull up Exhibit 369 at page 12? This has been admitted, Your Honor.
All right, we publish to the jury.
Dr. Moore, you said you've treated thousands of hand injuries over the course of your career, correct?
Correct.
What is that on Mr. Depp's hand?
So we describe that as a...
Objection, calls for speculation.
The picture just changed.
Sorry, page 12, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What is that on Mr. Depp's hand?
So that's a plaster
I'm sorry.
splint.
Overruled the objection.
Okay, sorry, thank you. I'm sorry, please tell the jury what that is on Mr. Depp's hand.
So that's a plaster splint. A half a cast is how I sometimes describe it to patients, and it provides stability for comfort and to protect fractures in the course of treatment.
Is that plaster splint hard or soft?
What's plaster Paris? It hardens like a cast does.
Dr. Moore, does Mr. Depp's description of how his finger became injured line up with the facts that you've seen?
No.
I have no further questions.
All right,
Thank you, Dr. Moore.
Cross